Okay, third graders, it's now part 2 of your landscape that shows the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. And you can see that the foreground, the tree is bigger, it's up closer to us. The middle ground, it's about halfway between the back and the foreground. In the background, the tree is smaller because the further away things become, the smaller they are. So now we're going to take either a black Sharpie or a black crayon and very quickly just use that to just color very quickly through your tree branches. Now I'm not saturating, I'm not coloring it completely in, I'm just giving it some texture lines. So you'll do this to all of your trees. I'm just going to do it to one of my trees right now, just in order to save us some time. But take your black crayon or your black Sharpie and just go through all of your tree branches like this. Keep a close eye on where your branches are going so that you don't accidentally color the background, the mountains or the sky, or somewhere where you don't want to color. Okay, after you've gone over it with your black Sharpie or your black crayon, then I want you to get a brown crayon and I want you to go over the top and saturate. That means fill in all the spaces that need to be filled in that have not been completely colored. So you'll saturate with brown. Once again, I'm doing mine very quickly so that I can give you time to get started. Make sure that you do every tree and every tree branch. I have to tell you that your fancy cake that you did last week, I was so impressed. I saw some excellent work. I'm very impressed. And as you were doing your fancy cake, you learned about value. And value is the darkness or the lightness of a color. We're going to be using that same element of art on this paper, on this project. Okay, so once you've colored in all of your trees, saturated with brown crayon, then you're going to do the mountains in the background. Now, some of you may have snow-capped mountains, and if you do, that's fine. If you do have snow-capped mountains, you will need to use a white crayon to color the snow on your mountaintops. I chose not to do snow-capped mountains. My mountains are just going to be a solid color. I'm going to make my mountains a purple color. So I'm going to just lightly color anything in the background that is a mountain. Mountains can be one of two colors. You can do blue or purple. Make sure you keep a close eye on where the mountain would be behind the trees. You should already have your tree branches colored, so you should be able to see very easily mountains from the trees. After you finish your mountains and you've colored them in, just color them lightly. Don't have to saturate them too. You don't have to make them too thick and too dark because we are going to be using some watercolor paint over the top. Okay, now my sky, I'm going to color it blue. Filling in the spaces behind the trees that would be part of the sky. And so on and so forth. You'll just finish your entire sky. I'm not going to take the time to do that right now, but I think you get the idea. Make sure all of the sky, the mountains, and the tree branches are colored. And then we're going to work on your foreground or your middle ground. We're going to use a light green and a dark green crayon. And the foreground, in this very front part, you're going to start with your darker green and just put some dark green close to where you are, close to the bottom of the paper. It doesn't have to be in a straight line. You can kind of move it around. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my middle ground, put my darker green across the bottom, closer to the line. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my background. Put the darker color right up against the line. Doesn't have to be straight lines. See how I'm kind of swooping it up and around, because nothing in nature is a straight line. And then my lighter green, I'm going to go a little bit over the top of the darker green, but I'm going to fill in the extra space with the darker green. And I'm going to go over the top of that, doing some blending. I'm also using the element of art value because I have a darker value of green against a lighter value of green, which is another element of art that really is useful when you are designing anything in nature. And after you have that all filled in, you've got your two colors of green. You may want to go back over the top with your darker green and just blend that darker green a little bit more into your lighter green, just in a few places, so that it does look a little more blended. And one thing I know about third grade is as you become an artist and you're developing your talents, third grade is a great time to start doing color blends. And I've noticed that a lot of you are doing color blends, and you're doing a beautiful job blending multiple colors together. Okay, after you have that colored, now if you do not have, if you don't have watercolor paints at home, then you would be finished. This would be the end of your project. But if you do have watercolor paints, I want to show you the extra step that you will need to do. So here's one that I finished earlier. You're going to take your watercolor set and put some color, or some water, I mean, in your blue, your purple, and your green, and maybe just a little bit in brown. Just kind of put a little water in those colors so that they're kind of softening. Now, the one thing I need my students to learn is that the water goes on the paper first. So I'm going to put water, just water, on the paper where I want my purple paint to go. And I want you to notice how the paint does not stick. This is a watercolor resist. The oil and wax in the crayon is preventing the paint from sticking, but I want it to just sit there and dry, because as it dries, it builds a really interesting texture look. So I hope you noticed how I was just putting the paint, the water, just where I want that purple paint to go. First the water, and then a little bit of paint on top of it. Let me do some on the green. First put on the water, and then a little green on top of it. Make sure you don't pick up your paper and try to move it around, or else all of the paint will roll off of it. But you're just going to let it sit there. Now I'm going to do a little bit of this blue mountain. First the water, then a little bit of paint. And then just let it sit there. Don't pick it up. Let it dry for several hours. This is also filling in any space on your paper that might not have been colored. Any of that area behind the crayon that this paint's going to seep into and fill it with color. First the water, and then the paint on top of it. Let me try a little bit on my trees. First I put on some water, then I take a little bit of paint and add it on top of the water. Okay, boys and girls, I'm going to let you go ahead and start working on that. After it dries, after you have it completely colored and it looks just the way you want it to look, please take a picture of it and send it to me. I can't wait to see your foreground, middle ground, and background landscape.